reaching back up the hill around Fulton is pretty difficult. I can still do it, but it's like more than a 9% grade in some parts, so it's very slow.
Could you talk about if they could put a ramp over here, what that would do?
If they did put in a ramp, would have plenty of room to originally put it in from Fulton to here. If they had a graded ramp all the way along the side and maybe one short switchback, there would have been plenty of room for it, and it would have made accessibility to Gwyn a lot easier, and to most of the other services that were also down at this level too, including health services.
What would be your recommendation for them to tear it up? And
I don't know. It would be unfortunate if they had to tear it all up. If there would be a way to include a ramp along some portion of this.
With Disabilities Act, discrimination of people with disabilities, and says that people with disabilities have the right to participate. But the Department of Justice and Congress realized that the ADA was a complicated law, so it created these 10 regional ADA centers across the country, and the centers provide information and training on the ADA. We are not a compliance agency. We promote understanding. The New England ADA Center is a project of the Institute for Human-Centered Design, an international nonprofit focused on promoting the inclusion and experiences of people through excellence in design. So if you create for people on the outer edges of society, then it's more likely that everybody can participate.
Tell me a little bit about the laws that would be specific for education institutions.
Yep. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is all right, so what is Section 504 and what is IDEA? Let's take those two laws separately. First, Section 504 was our first civil rights law that prohibited discrimination against people with disabilities and said that people with disabilities have the right to participate. However, it only applied to federal agencies or to organizations receiving federal funds, so that left a lot of organizations out. So, for example, organizations that 504 applied to would be universities, because most of universities receive federal funds through financial aid. But it doesn't apply to private businesses or nonprofits. So doctors' offices, lawyers, tax accountants, restaurants, theaters. Most of those organizations don't receive federal funds, so Section 504 wouldn't apply. On the other hand, we have Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So on the other hand, we have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, first known as the Education for All Handicapped Children, which ensures that children with disabilities received a free and appropriate public education. So now they can be educated in their community schools with their peers. Before this legislation, the people or children with disabilities were either kept at home, hidden away, or institutionalized. Now, hidden away or institutionalized. Now, because of this legislation, they can be educated with their peers in their community school, in their classroom. Often we think of universal design as accessibility, and they're really not one and the same. But if you design a space from the beginning, it's not that ugly concrete, or it doesn't have to be that ugly concrete.
Hi, so could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jane Harden, and I'm an associate professor of practice at Simmons College in Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about your work here with inclusion.
Well, the vast majority of my time since I've been teaching at Simmons has been to prepare teachers who go into the field of special education. So by that sheer nature, inclusion has always been something that's been a central part of my ideology and teaching practice. But in terms of accessibility and inclusion, that really came to a more focused point this past fall because I created a course called Navigating Boston Accessibility for All. And it was an intro course for first-year students at Simmons. Students could elect a variety of Boston-based courses, so I happened to have a number of students that selected mine. And I would say the experience was fascinating. I hope my students learned half as much from me as I learned from them. I had enough aware of them.
Okay.
One of the purposes of the course was to help them look at the world, not only right in Boston, around Simmons, and in their own community, about accessibility. I wanted them to go out and try using a wheelchair and navigate around campus. I sent them out to what we call community investigations. And so they would go out in small groups, and I would give them a focus of looking at the city now through the eyes of someone that might have a challenge. So they would document it through their iPhones and their cameras and take pictures of curb cuts or lack of curb cuts or bad sidewalks. They went into stores around here, which I probably should not name, but some of them were brand new and they did some things right. They might have a Braille index in their front foyer, but then that's where it ended. And once you got to a certain floor, you might not know exactly what materials, what objects were on sale at that point. Or you might have trouble, you might be able to get into the store, but somebody would leave a bunch of shopping carts that would prevent access to perhaps a ramp. So I think one of the things that came out of the course that was really important is students started to realize that all of us are temporarily able-bodied people. And that at some point in your life, if you live long enough, you will probably need either a cane or a walker or perhaps a wheelchair. So why can't we start to make the world, in the words of one of the guest speakers that we had at a panel this past fall, Jessica Kensky, who was one of the Boston Marathon bomb victims, she said, why can't we make the world not just handicap accessible, but how about handicap pleasant?
Hi, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm a doctoral student in counseling psychology at Boston University currently, and I am a student in a wheelchair, and I've been in a wheelchair since I was 11 years old.
Okay. So tell me, what do you do at BU?
BU, I'm currently studying counseling psychology, and my research focused on career development in children and adolescents, and my other research focused on really just coping and trauma and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm taking classes, working at a practicum site called Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders, and yeah, I really enjoy it. Yeah.
Cool. So what I'd like to know is a little bit about your experience here at BU.
Yeah, so BU has been great. So let's see, where do I start? I got my master's at Boston College before coming to BU. So I had really difficult experience at Boston College. So when I first came here, I had a lot of worries. I didn't know how the service for students with disability would react to my request for accommodations and things like that. So I went before school started to make sure that I had all the accommodations, and the first thing they said was they will take care of me and everything should be fine, and things have been great. Yeah, I mean it's not perfect, being a student in a wheelchair is difficult wherever you go, so I understand the challenges, but there are things that school has done for me so that I can actually get to classes and get my work done, and I've actually have done a year and a half of schoolwork here so far, and it's been an amazing experience. Yeah.
So give me an example of what BU's done. Like you said, you had maybe a challenge with transportation or something,
Right.
And how did they respond?
So first thing I noticed was being on the buses here. So BU has transportation system here, and all the drivers know, at least the ones I've met so far, seem to know how to use the straps when I need to. So when I usually get on the bus, they know how to use the ramp to actually help me get on the bus. And sometimes it's difficult because there's malfunctioning things like that. So they know how to actually use the ramps manually to help me get on the bus and help me get off the bus, or help me strap down so that it wouldn't be dangerous for me to be on the bus. So it seems like most drivers know how to use all the equipment and all the services that they have. So it's been good. And being in school of education, there are challenges because it's like half the building's half story higher. I guess I don't know if that makes sense. So there are lifts within the building, and there was a person who was in charge of the building who helped me use all the services appropriately so I can actually get to classes, I get to offices if I need to. They actually moved my office roommates so it's perfectly accessible instead of having to go up on a lift or something like that. So yeah, it's been really wonderful.
Okay, so could you give me a little bit of your experience at Boston College?
So Boston College was difficult. So before I actually talk about Boston College, I want to talk about my experience at University of Michigan. That's where I went for my undergrad. And I think when I got to Boston College, that's when I realized that I took a lot of things for granted when I was an undergrad. So at University of Michigan, they have amazing services. Looking back, I think they have the best services so far. So they had, the dorms were perfectly accessible. They had all the rooms ready for me when I got there. They had the wheelchair accessible bathroom. They actually prepared everything for me, so I didn't have to worry about dorms at all. And they also had van services, transportation system for students with disabilities specifically, which was really helpful because it was door-to-door service, and they had a van with the lifts, so they picked me up before class, after class, and if I needed something at the last minute, I need to get somewhere, they're usually flexible about picking me up on time and taking me to places. So, and they had scholarships for students with disabilities too, which helped me get through, many semesters. And overall, and they also there was one class that I wanted to take, which was in the basement. It was accessible, but they were concerned about me taking the lift down to the basement, getting to the class, so they actually moved the class onto the first floor for me. They had to move a lot of equipment within that room so that we have all the equipments too. So they did everything they could to provide same opportunities for students with disabilities.
Okay, wow, wonderful.
So yeah, it was great. So going from University of Michigan to Boston College was an interesting experience because things were different. Because I think as a person with a disability, or any student for that matter, everywhere we go, it's difficult to adjust to a new environment.
Yes.
But at University of Michigan, it wasn't difficult for me to adjust because of my disability. It was because I was new there. Whereas at BC, I think that's where I felt discriminated against because I was a student with a disability.
Want to give an example of what your experience was?
Yeah.
Did you ask for accommodations
Yeah,
at
so-
BC,
yeah.
and what did they? How did
Yeah.
they respond?
So before, because I'm usually prepared to get things done. So before, way before school started, I got all the letters from the doctors ready. I made a list of all the accommodations I need and provided disability services there at BC. And so I thought, okay, things will be fine. Maybe they have a van like University of Michigan or something. And they didn't have a van. They let me know in advance. So I was like, okay, so I'll try to take the bus. And BC is on a hill, so it's very difficult to get to classes on my own. So I had to take the bus to class. So I was trying to take the bus. So the first day I had a class, the drivers did not know how to use the ramp or how to use the straps or anything. So the first day it was raining too. It was a miserable day, I remember. And I was sitting outside just waiting for the driver to try to open up the ramp so that I could get on the bus. And it was a huge struggle. I was sitting there, I'm like, okay. So once he figured out how to use the ramp, I got on the bus. It was crowded, and my brakes are good, but not good enough to hold me still on a bus. So I was just moving all over the place, basically. I was holding on for my dear life because I wasn't strapped down. So that was a really scary experience. And on top of this, on the way back that night, back after classes, so I was trying to get I was waiting for the bus to get back home. I was waiting for the bus. And then that bus was older bus, so it didn't have a lower ramp type of thing. So they had steps, but actually there was a built-in ramp. So on the bus there was that sign that said, the wheelchair sign, that showed that it was accessible for people with disabilities. But the driver looked at me and he kind of shook his head like, this is not accessible, I can't. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, so how do I get home? I don't know. And so I had to wait for the next bus, which was a newer bus, so which had the ramp and everything. So I was able to get on the bus fine. But that night I just felt miserable because I was already struggling on campus to get to classes because it was so hilly, it was so difficult. Well, thanks to BC, I have strong arms now, but but later I found out that those older buses had ramps too. It's just the drivers didn't know how to use it. And so I think the first semester or so we struggled a lot. I struggled a lot. The drivers struggled a lot because it seemed like they were never really trained to use the straps, use the ramps. So they just didn't know. I mean, I don't blame them if they didn't have the training, but if school knew that there was a student with a disability, I think it would have been helpful for all the drivers to be trained. So I think it took about a semester or so to talk to the people at the office for students with disabilities and to talk to the dispatcher for all the buses and things like that. So eventually throughout the semester I struggled a lot with all the drivers and things like that, but after a semester we finally came up with a system where I called the dispatcher and let him know that I'm at a certain bus stop and the driver should pick me up and drop me off someplace else. So it became like a sort of more complicated process, but eventually it worked out. So it took about a semester. And there were certain classes that were really difficult to get to because there was such a hill. So I'm guessing most people can find it on BC website. So their website shows the map of the campus, which shows wheelchair negotiable paths, which are not wheelchair accessible paths. So, which I didn't know before coming, and wheelchair negotiable path does not mean they're accessible all the time. So they are somewhat flat, but still very difficult for a person in a manual wheelchair. Maybe power chair is possible, but imagine just going up on a hill on a snowy day, BC, and it snows a lot there. So it's just a very difficult experience. Right.
Did you, when you couldn't get around, did you ask for accommodations?
Right, so I couldn't get around, so I was trying to see if they can get a van for me, because I knew that there were these vans that were available for people who had injuries, like athletes who had injuries or whatnot, but those did not have lifts, so they said that it wouldn't work because if the drivers get injured from lifting up my chair or something like that, they would have other liability issues, so they couldn't have those vans pick me up. And I tried to ask maybe somebody who can push me around campus, which I hate having, to be honest. As a person with disability, I try to do everything on my own if I can. Like at BU, I'm doing fine on my own. At University of Michigan, I did perfectly fine on my own. But at BC, I just couldn't get around on my own. So as a result, I had to ask to have support, so somebody who can push me around on campus. So that took another semester, I believe. And eventually, when the Office for Students with Disabilities provided that service for me, they said that that person would only be available on bad weather days. I forget how they called it. So, which meant that when it only rains, when it only snows, I can contact the person and they'll pay the person. Which, it just became ridiculous because every day is a bad day in BC if you think about it, because it's on a hill and it's cold and snowy most of the semester, most of the school year, and yeah, it's just really, really difficult to get around anywhere on my own. So eventually I talked to my advisor at School of Education, and she asked the dean to hire somebody to push me around on campus all year long, just throughout the semester. So finally they did that, which was helpful, but it wasn't Office for Students with Disabilities who provided that service, which is unfortunate because it shouldn't be the individual, like smaller department's job to provide that service. It is the job for the Office for Students with Disabilities to take care of. So I think every time I went to get help from that office, I didn't get much support at all. Most sometimes I think it was just kind of like, oh, we don't know what to do, oh, we do this, we'll do that, but nothing really worked that well. So I guess one thing I learned is that I learned to really, learn to advocate for myself, yeah.
Right. Did you ever talk to the ADA 504 coordinator, or was there a person given to you with a name or the title?
There was a person named Dean Durrett, I think.
Okay.
Is that the person?
Yeah, no, she's Disability Services.
Okay, I don't know.
But was there somebody that was responsible for all ADA 504 issues on campus?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. What did you find was the response of other students
Other students.
to your access issues?
I think other students saw that I was clearly struggling. I think there was one time, it was a really rainy day. So I actually asked if the bus stops could be changed, like one of the bus stops could be closer to the building I usually go to. And they couldn't change. So, but I only asked because so one time it was a rainy day, my friend was with me, and I got dropped off from the bus. I was going to class, but because it's rainy and slippery, I was screaming down the hill, just going down, and I didn't know how to stop myself, and my friend was luckily there to help me stop, but I was screaming. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die here. So it's just really dangerous to be on a hilly campus and not have all the accommodations I need. And I mean, I understand that University of Michigan is flat, BU's flat, like BC's not, right? So I understand the challenges BC has, and it's difficult, but it's really difficult for students with disabilities. But I think when it is more difficult, it is important for the school to provide additional accommodations so that students can have the same opportunities as other students to be able to go to classes. Because I think my biggest challenge at BC was not being able to go to classes because it just wasn't accessible. So, yeah.
Wow. What would, if you want to present a message to Boston College, what would it be regarding accessibility?
I understand that BC has a lot of challenges. It's on a hill. It's in Boston where it's cold and it snows a lot. It's difficult. It's really difficult to provide all the accommodations, but I completely understand that, but I think it's really important to have additional services for students so that students can actually get to classes without having to worry about the hills, the rainy days, and the snowy days, and at least have a van with lifts or something like that that could pick up students. I understand it's a small campus, but still I think having a van with a lift would be really helpful for students with disabilities. And
Are you talking about a van that would go door to door,
Right.
not just a sedan
right.
to the parking lot, like
Right.
Eagle Escort? Okay.
Right, I think that would be very helpful. And I know that, I think when I was at BC, there was another student in the program who was blind, and she had a lot of difficulties too, so I don't know what kind of accommodations that she needed, but it would be helpful to really try to understand different accommodations the school can actually provide, so that students can have the same access to all the services at school.
And you weren't able to go to classes?
Right,
Gotcha.
on my own, it was extremely difficult. So I had help from friends, and eventually the other person who was hired, who was my friend as well, was hired to push me on campus. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I am from Medfield, Massachusetts.
Okay, so you want to tell me a little bit about how you move your chair around?
Very well, so I drive.
Me about University of Illinois?
Well, so University of Illinois has one of the nation's best disability programs called Disability Resource and Educational Services, or DRES. And through DRES, we have the ability to have transportation, student services. Those include things for like testing and support for like if we need note takers or we need to go physically into the building to do testing. We can do it in a different location. So all that's held at DRES. It's a separate building. Then they also have the Beckwith Residential Support Services, and that is a housing service where everyone in that housing, so it's a hall that's located in Nugent Hall, which is one of the dormitories, and everyone in the housing can, well, everyone that's in the first floor or in Beckwith has disabilities, physical disabilities. There's 26 of us. Through this program, you can hire PCAs, so you have 5 hours that you're given of PAs per day, and you hire them out. They're just college students that you hire, and those people come for the hour or the 2 hours that you need help you out. 24-hour PCA on staff on the floor at all times. So if you drop something and you don't have a PCA with you, you can just go down the hall and ask them for help. So that's just some of what they have.
I think that's incredible. So tell me, what are some of the barriers that you met there, and how did